The haunting of Mary. Mary was just like any other 19-year-old student living in the heart of New York City. She had a small apartment in Brooklyn, shared with a couple of friends. She was studying architecture at a prestigious university, balancing late-night study sessions with the chaos of city life. Life was busy, overwhelming at times, but she felt like she was on the right path. That was until everything started to change. It all began with the old apartment. Mary had rented it on a whim, seduced by the low price in an otherwise expensive city. The building was old, almost ancient, with creaky floors and narrow hallways. The elevator often malfunctioned, and the lights flickered at the most inconvenient moments. Still, she didn't think much of it. It was just part of living in New York, she thought. One evening, Mary returned to her apartment after a late night of studying in the library. The air felt unusually thick, heavy with something she couldn't name. As she stepped into her room, the temperature seemed to drop, and a chill ran up her spine. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlight peeking through the window. The only sound was the low hum of the city below, but tonight it sounded wrong. She noticed it immediately. A shadow in the corner of her room. It wasn't a trick of the light. This shadow had shape, movement. Her heart skipped a beat. She froze, staring at the dark corner, trying to convince herself it was just her imagination playing tricks. But then it moved again, subtly, almost like it was alive. Mary backed away slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she texted her roommate, Sarah, asking if she'd been in the apartment earlier. No response. That's when the air seemed to grow even colder. The shadow seemed to grow larger, its edges rippling like liquid. Mary could feel the presence of something unseen, something old. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, but no one was there. The feeling of being watched became unbearable. It wasn't just the shadow now. It was as if someone was standing right behind her. She spun around, but there was nothing there. The next few days were a blur. Mary couldn't shake the feeling of being followed, or something lurking just out of sight. She tried to ignore it, telling herself she was just stressed out from exams. But one night, when she returned home late after a study session, it happened again. The shadow. This time it was standing at the foot of her bed, watching her. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared, paralyzed by fear. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow shifted, stretching, twisting unnaturally, and for the first time, Mary saw it clearly. A figure hunched, with hollow eyes staring back at her. She could feel its gaze, cold and empty, draining her of warmth. Mary finally managed to break free from her paralysis, grabbing her phone to call Sarah. But when she looked up, the figure was gone, vanishing into the dark corners of her room. She turned on the lights, her hands shaking as she checked every inch of the apartment, but everything seemed normal. Too normal. Her heart raced as she wondered if she had imagined it. But deep down, she knew she hadn't. The following nights were even worse. The shadow began to grow more distinct, more real, and every night it got closer. Every time she turned out the lights, she could feel it watching her, waiting. The temperature in her room dropped lower and lower, and sleep became impossible. She couldn't escape it. One evening, desperate for answers, Mary went to the local library, looking for any clues about the history of the building. After hours of searching, she found an old newspaper article, yellowed with age. It told the story of a family who had once lived in her apartment building, a family that had vanished without a trace nearly 50 years ago. The mother, Mary noticed, shared the same name as her. It was a chilling coincidence that she couldn't ignore it. The article described strange occurrences that plagued the family before they disappeared. Unexplained shadows, whispers in the night, objects moving on their own. The final line of the article made her blood run cold. The family was last seen entering the building, but none of them were ever found. Some believe they are still there, lost in the dark. That night, Mary couldn't take it anymore. She packed her things and left, vowing never to return. But as she reached the bottom of the stairs in the building, she heard something that stopped her in her tracks. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the top floor. She turned, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no one there. The air was thick with a presence she could feel deep in her bones. She ran out of the building, not stopping until she reached the street. She looked up at the dark windows of the apartment. In the uppermost corner, a shadow appeared, watching her from behind the glass. It was no longer just a shadow. It was a face, distorted and hollow, staring down at her. Mary never returned to that apartment. She left New York shortly after, moving across the country in search of peace. But no matter where she went, she could never escape that face, those hollow eyes, that unshakable presence that followed her from the darkness. She knew, deep down, that it wasn't just an old building she had escaped from. It was something much darker, something that would always be waiting for her, lurking in the shadows. And as for the apartment, it remained empty, the lights flickering in the dead of night, as if it were still waiting for its next tenant, waiting for the next victim.
The Midnight Visitor. Eric was 20 years old, living in a small apartment in the heart of Miami. He had moved to the city just a few months ago, hoping for a fresh start. The warm breeze, the vibrant nightlife, and the promise of new opportunities had lured him here. But something wasn't right. Not anymore. It all started on a quiet Thursday night. Eric had just finished a long shift at a local restaurant and was looking forward to a peaceful evening at home. He was exhausted, the weight of the day pressing down on him. As he entered his apartment, the familiar scent of old wood and faint citrus filled the air. He kicked off his shoes, dropped his keys on the counter, and went straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. As he turned on the faucet, the lights flickered, just a brief flash, nothing too alarming, but enough to make him pause. He shook his head, blaming it on the old wiring in the building. Miami was known for humidity, and sometimes it affected everything, even the lights. But that didn't explain the feeling creeping over him, the sudden sense of unease that seemed to fill the room. Eric shrugged it off and returned to the couch with his water. Turning on the TV, he settled in, the soft glow of the screen casting shadows across his living room. He was just starting to relax when he heard it, a faint, scratching sound coming from the hallway. It was soft at first, almost like the wind brushing against the walls. But then it grew louder, a constant rhythmic scraping. Eric's heart began to race. He tried to tell himself it was nothing, just the old building settling, but the sound was too consistent. He stood up, his pulse quickening, and walked toward the hallway. The sound stopped the moment he reached the threshold of his bedroom door. The hallway was dark, eerily quiet now. He checked every room, thinking it might be a loose piece of furniture or something else, but everything was as it should be. He stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to shake the unsettling feeling in his chest, and then headed back to the living room. As he sat down again, the silence enveloped him, but he couldn't shake the nagging sensation that something wasn't right. He turned off the TV, hoping the quiet would help him clear his mind, but that only made it worse. The air seemed thick, almost suffocating. That's when he heard again, the sound this time closer, almost as if it were right outside his door. It was louder now, unmistakable, scratching. It sounded like nails on wood, deliberate and slow. His breath caught in his throat. He stood up again, this time moving cautiously toward the door. His mind raced. Was it a neighbor? Maybe someone had gotten locked out? But no, the sound wasn't like someone trying to break in. It was more purposeful. He opened the door slowly, peering out into the dark hallway. Nothing, just a dim light from the end of the corridor, casting long shadows on the walls. He was about to close the door when he caught sight of something, a shape in the distance. At the very end of the hallway, a figure, standing still, watching. Eric's heart skipped a beat. The figure didn't move, didn't react at all. It was like it was frozen in place. He could barely make out any details, just a silhouette of a person tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes. His breath quickened, and for a moment, he wondered if he was just imagining it. But then, the figure moved. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. Eric felt a chill crawl up his spine as the figure began to walk toward him, its footsteps soft, deliberate. Without thinking, Eric slammed the door shut, his hand shaking as he turned the lock. He backed away from the door, his mind racing. What was going on? Who was that? And why did it feel like it was coming for him? He glanced around his apartment, trying to make sense of everything. The clock on the wall read 11:57 p.m. Just a few minutes ago, the place felt normal, quiet, peaceful. Now it felt wrong. The air was suffocating. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch, reaching out toward him. He grabbed his phone and dialed his best friend Matt, but the call went straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again, no answer. As he sat there, staring at his phone, the scratching sound started again. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and closer, just like before. Eric's eyes darted to the door, the doorknob trembling, as though something was trying to turn it from the other side. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. Dead silence filled the apartment, the tension almost unbearable. Eric could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. He dared to open the door, just a crack. Peering into the hallway, the figure was gone, but something was different. The walls seemed to close in on him, the shadows darker than before. It felt like the air itself had changed, thick with something he couldn't explain. Then, out of nowhere, a cold, rasping voice whispered from the darkness, "Come closer." Eric's blood ran cold. His body froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. The voice was deep, hollow, and seemed to echo in his very bones. It was not a voice he recognized. It was something else. He slammed the door shut again, his back pressed against it as he slid down the floor, gasping for breath. He couldn't stay here. He had to leave. But as he stood up, ready to run, the apartment door swung open on its own. The hallway was empty. Eric felt a chill wash over him. He had to get out, now. But just as he turned to leave, he saw it again. The figure, standing in his living room, facing him. It wasn't the same figure. This one was different, twisted. Its face was pale, eyes black as coal. A twisted grin spread across its face, stretching unnaturally wide. Before Eric could react, the lights flickered one last time, plunging him into complete darkness. The last thing he heard was that same voice, this time louder, clearer. "You're not leaving, Eric." The next morning, Eric's apartment was empty. His phone was found on the floor, unlocked and open to a message from Matt. But Eric was never found. To this day, no one knows what happened to him. The apartment remains unoccupied, its lights flickering at night, and sometimes, if you listen closely, you can still hear that faint scratching sound in the walls. They say Eric's still there, trapped, waiting for someone to come close enough. The reflection in the glass. Sarah had always been the center of attention. At 23, she was a rising model in Florida's competitive fashion industry. Her beauty, poise, and flawless skin made her a sought-after name in every major magazine and runway show. But with fame came the pressure, the late nights, and the constant desire to be perfect. She had a beautiful apartment in downtown Miami, with large windows that offered an incredible view of the skyline. Everything seemed perfect, but little did she know, her life was about to take a dark turn. It started subtly. Sarah began noticing strange things around her apartment. It was never anything too alarming at first, just small things she brushed off. A glass moved slightly across the counter when no one was near. The lights in the hallway flickered at odd hours. Sometimes she would hear soft whispers when no one was around. Sarah tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was just stress or a trick of the mind from working long hours. One night, after a particularly exhausting photo shoot, Sarah decided to relax in front of the mirror in her living room. The mirror was large, framed in sleek black metal, and reflected the entirety of the space. She'd always loved how it made her apartment feel larger. But tonight, as she sat down in front of it, something felt off. The reflection didn't seem to match her movements. She tilted her head to the side, watching herself in the glass. But in the reflection, her image stayed still for a moment longer than it should have. Sarah blinked, confused. It was as if the mirror was slow to catch up with her movements. But that wasn't possible, was it? She shook her head and stood up, trying to dismiss the unease growing in her chest. But as she walked to the kitchen, she caught a glimpse of something in the reflection, something she hadn't seen in the room. It was faint, but there was a figure standing just behind her in the mirror, watching her. Sarah spun around, her breath caught in her throat, but there was nothing there, just the empty space of her apartment. Her heart raced, but she tried to calm herself. "It's just exhaustion," she whispered. "It's all in your head." Yet, deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next few days were a blur of strange occurrences. Every time she passed a mirror, the reflection seemed slightly off, like something was hiding just beneath the surface. The whispers became clearer, always when she was alone. Sometimes she'd hear her name, soft and sweet, followed by a cold breeze brushing against her skin. The temperature in the apartment would drop unexpectedly, even in the middle of the Florida heat. Sarah's friends noticed her growing unease, but she couldn't bring herself to tell them. How could she explain the strange feeling she was having? She was a confident, successful model. She couldn't appear weak, so she kept it all to herself. But one night, it all came to a head. Sarah was getting ready for another high-profile event. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her dress. The reflection was normal at first, showing her poised and composed as she always did. But as she leaned in closer to fix her makeup, something shifted. This time, the reflection didn't mimic her movements at all. Instead, it started to act on its own. Sarah watched in horror as her reflection smiled, wide, unnaturally wide, and then tilted its head slowly, as if examining her. Her heart pounded in her chest as the figure in the mirror began to move without her. It reached out, its hand coming toward the glass, fingers curling in a grotesque motion. Frozen, Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away. The reflection's fingers pressed against the glass as though it was trying to break through, its smile widening, stretching unnaturally. Then the figure whispered, but this time it wasn't soft and distant. It was loud, clear, and chilling. "You can never leave." Sarah stumbled back, her breath shallow and panicked. She reached for the light switch, but the room plunged into darkness, and the whispers grew louder, echoing around her. She flicked the light back on, only to find that the reflection had changed. The figure in the mirror was now standing directly behind her, its face twisted in a grotesque expression, its eyes black as night. Without thinking, she ran from the apartment, her pulse pounding in her ears. The apartment felt alive, as if it were suffocating her. The whispers followed her, growing louder with each step. Sarah didn't stop running until she reached the elevator, but even as the doors closed, she swore she could still hear the voice calling her name, faint but persistent. The next morning, Sarah packed her things, unable to return to the apartment. She stayed with a friend for a few days, but no matter where she went, the haunting continued. Her reflection was never the same. In every mirror, in every window, she saw the same twisted figure staring back at her, always just behind her, always smiling, desperate. She contacted an old acquaintance, someone who claimed to have knowledge of the supernatural. The woman listened carefully to Sarah's story and then told her something that sent a shiver down her spine. "You've invited it in, Sarah. The reflection you see isn't just a reflection. It's a spirit. It's a shadow of yourself, but it's not you. It's something dark, something hungry." Sarah tried to flee. She moved to a different city, cut off all ties to Miami, and even changed her phone number. But no matter how far she ran, it was always there. The reflection, the whispers, the dark figure lurking just behind her. It's been years since Sarah left Florida, but sometimes when she stands in front of a mirror, she still sees it. The twisted face, grinning from the glass, waiting for the moment when it will claim her completely. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent, she swears she hears the whispers again, soft and distant, calling her name. You can never escape, Sarah.